Hi there, welcome to Transcendent Psych. I'm starting a new series where I'm going to be journeying, hopefully with you, but also with mystics who I'm hoping will give us some inspiration. I'm going to tackle these as kind of reflections or meditations that I might do sometimes daily, sometimes once a week. We'll see how we go. But we start with Meister Eckhart from the 13th century, who was a mystic and a philosopher and a theologian, a Dominican friar. Um, and we're going to be looking at some of the kind of inspiring bits from his instructions on spiritual life. Now, I just want to flag up a little bit that I feel a bit strange doing this because I'm going to try and get the psychological insights out of Meister Eckhart. But he is from a very different age, and many of my viewers might not be religious. You might be spiritually inclined, who knows? But you might not be religious. And he's going to use language about God and divine love and even sin and so forth. And what I would encourage you to do is just to take him as he is, at the level he is. If you don't believe in God or what have you, I still think there's going to be some useful insights you can take away from this. If you do, I think it'll be even more insights that you can take from him as well. Because I do think there is an element to a kind of theistic or a spiritual psychology, which maybe a secular psychology can't provide, but we'll come on to that as we go. But hang in there and be open-minded. So whatever else is going on in your day, just clear your mental plate, clear your spiritual plate, and come at this afresh with an open mind, open heart. So I'm going to start by reading the whole passage, and then we'll reflect on key parts as we go. Let's warn you, it's going to sound antiquated, but I think you can hear Eckhart's gentleness in all of this. He writes, concerning sin and our proper attitude when we find ourselves in sin. You might want to replace that with moral failings, or when I let myself down, when I end up back in a bad habit again that I've always intended not to. Could be eating too much, or it could be not exercising. It could be losing your rag with people, whatever. It could be all sorts of things. So here we go. Eckhart writes, truly to have committed a sin is not sinful if we regret what we've done. Interesting. Indeed, not for anything in time or eternity should we want to commit a sin, neither of a mortal, venial, or any other kind. So, not being a Catholic myself, this is kind of novel language. Whoever knows the ways of God, writes Eckhart, should always be mindful of the fact that God, who is faithful and loving, has led us from a sinful life into a godly one, thus making friends of us who were previously enemies, which is a greater achievement even than making a new earth. This is one of the chief reasons why we should be wholly established in God, and it's astonishing how much this inflames us with so great and so strong a love that we strip ourselves entirely of ourselves. I'm going to come back to that phrase in a bit. Indeed, if you are rightly placed in the will of God, then you should not wish that the sin, insert failing if you prefer, into which you fell had not happened. Of course, this is not the case because sin was something against God, but precisely because it was something against God, you were bound by it to greater love. You were humbled and brought low, and you should trust God that he would not have allowed it to happen unless he intended it for your profit. Interesting take there. Let us carry on. But when we raise ourselves out of sin and turn away from it, then God, in his faithfulness, acts as if we had never fallen into sin at all. And he does not punish us for our sins for a single moment, even if they are as great as the sum of all the sins that had ever been committed. God will not make us suffer on their account. but he can enjoy with us all the intimacy that he ever had with a creature. If he finds that we are now ready, then he does not consider what we were before. God is a God of the present. He takes you and receives you as he finds you now, not as you have been, but as you are now. I'm wondering if we could add in there, if we were writing with Eckhart, not even as you are going to be, what you hope to become in the future. God is the God of the present. He takes you as you are now. God willingly endures all the harm, writes Eckhart, and shame which all our sins have ever inflicted upon him, as he has already done for many years, in order that we should come to a deep knowledge of his love, and in order that our love and gratitude should increase and our zeal grow more intense, which often happens when we've repented of our sins. I'm going to pause there. We might come back to the last part of this short talk that he gives. But I want to draw out a few reflections for you here. Now, I did come back to that little phrase earlier on where he says, this is one of the chief reasons why we should be wholly established in God. And it's astonishing how much this inflames us with so great and so strong a love that we strip ourselves entirely of ourselves. Now, what does he mean by that? I think he means this, that when we fail, when we don't live up to the person we see ourselves as, it's almost like we've kind of stripped ourselves naked. The person, the illusion of who we thought we were is broken. And there's something really powerful in this, Eckhart wants to say, because what it does is it allows us to, well, A, face up to who we really are, but it also allows us to be loved by God, warts and all. And when we come to see that God embraces us and loves us, warts and all, this divine love cloaks us again in its mercy. And at that point, we are able to rejoice and to be filled with God's love. We become intense, like, wow, this is good. This is good stuff, that God is so loving. Think of, in the Christian tradition, think of the story of the prodigal son who, says to his dad, basically, hey, just give me my inheritance now. I'm going to go. I don't care about waiting until you've died. I'm going to go and spend it all, whatever. Right, just let me go now, and I'm going to spend up, have a good bit of a party. I don't care about anybody else or the family. I'm just going to do what I want to do. And he does that, runs himself into the ground. And then eventually, when he's come to the end of his tether, he comes back and says, Father, I have sinned against you and against heaven. I'm not worthy to be called your son. Just give me the food for the pigs. And before he's even got back, Jesus says in the story of the prodigal son, the father spots him and runs out to him, puts his best cloak on him, and puts a new ring on his finger. And they sacrifice, they kill the fatted calf, and they basically have a big family barbecue, a big celebration. Now, this love that Jesus describes here in the story of the prodigal son is an outrageously lavish, generous love. It's just the opposite of what is counterintuitive to what we think. We might do it for our children, but we often will not extend that kind of love to our what we see as undeserving selves. But what Eckhart wants to show us here is that actually, when you trip up, it's a great moment because it brings you back to yourself in reality. But it also brings you into the reality. If you'll just turn around and trust God, it brings you into the reality of God's love and mercy and forgiveness. And that intensifies, inflames your love for God. Okay, so you get this burning away of the false self. So there's a chance you can become face to face with the reality of who you are, but also the reality of who God is. Okay, now if we just come back to some other things that he said there, it's really great to hear that phrase he says there, for God is a God of the present. And he's just said that you could have committed all the addition of all the sins humans have ever committed. And what would God's response be? To forgive you and to take you as you are right that moment. Pause and let that sink in a moment. Think back to a time when you had some besetting failure or habit or characteristic about yourself that you really got annoyed with yourself about. Maybe you'd lost your temper again. Maybe had one too many drinks again. Maybe you'd said something you regret to somebody. Whatever it is, however bad people would say it was, God's attitude towards you is, that's the past. If you're coming to me now and you regret that, let's just take you as you are right now, as you are. That is the story of the prodigal son in the Gospels. The father runs out. The son is heading back. He's got his story straight in his head. I'll just say to him, what should I say to him? I'll tell him I'm not even worthy to be called your son, and I'll just give me the rubbish. Just give me the food that you give to the pigs. But what's the father's response? Not that. It's put a best robe on him, kill the fatted calf, which is the prized meal, the prized livestock, having a big party, a big barbecue, puts a ring on his finger. You're back in the family. This is your birthright. You're back in the family. And it's like, yeah, it completely goes beyond anything anybody would expect. Now, if you're religious, for example, and if your idea of God's mercy and love towards you is not to the point where you feel staggered by it, that it's beyond what you'd ever expect that you'd give to yourself, you are not understanding the love of God. That is the kind of love of God that Eckhart wants you to realize. And he says, as we pointed out a moment ago, God is a God of the present. He takes you and receives you as he finds you now, not as you have been, but as you are now, says Eckhart. One of the interesting things in a lot of work that therapists will do in psychology in terms of change is this concept of beginning to accept ourselves as we are. The paradox of change is that if we want to change, we have to face up to who we are right now, but we have to also face up to who we are right now with acceptance, not with biting self-criticism. And what we tend to do is the opposite of what the divine love is wanting to do here. This is what Eckhart's saying. What we tend to do is I've drawn this out. I don't know if you can see it on here. If I hold that where it's not going to green screen it out. It's going to be tricky. There it is. Just about to see it there. So what I've drawn out is we end up in a cycle of sort of failure. So we tell ourselves we failed. And then what we do next is we kind of get into self-criticism, and that turns towards self-preoccupation. And then that leads on to demoralization and an avoidance of actual further learning. And then, of course, that then cycles around into further failure. This is what often happens in depression. Depression has lots of connections with high levels of self-preoccupation, high levels of self-criticism, and high levels of what we call rumination, which is going back and getting stuck in our failings from the past in a cycle of going back over and back over it and back over it. And this is Eckhart speaking precisely into that and saying, actually, don't go back into the past. come into now. God is the God of the present. And God's acceptance and love towards us is full and total now. And only, I think people can give themselves self-acceptance, whether they're religious or not. I think you can learn to give yourself self-acceptance. I think if you believe that there is a transcendent love of the divine, in which we live and move and have our being, you have an extra resource and a realization that you are accepted and loved by the ultimate and the almighty source of all creation. And that can help you internalize your own self-acceptance. And the benefit of this is, as we've kind of already explained, it leads to a new pattern, a new cycle. If I hold that up, where again, I'm going to try to see if you can see that. So whereas before we had failure and then we went to self-criticism, here we go into how have I put that there? An outward turn. It's an outward move, not getting self-preoccupied, but an outward move, not back into the self with self-preoccupation, but an outward move towards the divine. And that also may be back towards the world again if you're not religious, but coming back out of that tightly knit, curled focus on ourselves. But it's really helpful if you can turn outwards towards the divine love that is in which we have our being. And that in turn leads to self-acceptance. If you're not religious, you might have to skip this first bit. You might want to turn back out towards the world again, rather than focusing just on yourself. But one way or another, you want to get to self-acceptance. And then that leads here, I'm just going to read it to you rather than trying to show you that. It leads to remaining open to learn and remaining in the game. Because one of the things that happens when we become self-occupied and then self-critical and then demoralized is we think we're beating ourselves up, saying, you did it again, you messed up again. And we think that sort of self-criticism is going to kind of beat us into doing better. What it does, the research shows, Christine Neff, for example, has done some really great research on self-compassion. What it actually does is it demoralizes us. It's like we're killing our energy so that we haven't got that energy and motivation to then remain open to thinking through what we might do differently. And makes it much more likely that we're going to go back around in circles in that loop and fail again. And that's how we end up with, if you like, more besetting sins, to use language of the Christian past. Okay, I think that's probably most of what I wanted to say here, really. I don't think there was anything else. But I hope to offer ongoing meditations. Let's just close by bringing this together and just take a moment to have a think about what we might need to do. So just bring to mind an area of your life where you have tripped up, where you failed, where you may have quite deliberately failed. And listen to Eckhart's words. God knew. God can use this for your profit. Rather than trying to avoid your failure, accept it. Accept it as you are. And at the same time, bring to mind now maybe the story of the prodigal son. Maybe imagine the divine love being wrapped around you as a rich garment, a cloak you just don't feel you deserve, but it's being given to you. And a ring placed on your finger. And God wanting to celebrate your return. Even though you feel like a failure, you regret what you've done, and you're returning. And God puts that ring on your finger, cloaks you in that divine love, that garment, And that being reclothed, of course, echoes the story of Genesis, of the nakedness of the first primeval humans in front of the presence of God, the sense of shame. If you look at those artworks of Adam and Eve trying to hide themselves in the Garden of Eden, we don't have to take it literally necessarily, but it's archetypal, symbolic picture of the shame people feel before perfection, before God. And in the Genesis story, God provides them with cover. It's a cover themselves up. And in this story of the prodigal son, but God provides a rich garment to go round the son. God does not want us to feel shame. He wants us to feel love and loved. We are deeply, deeply loved, as the Apostle John says, one of the shortest verses in the New Testament. God is love. God is love. We remember the words of Meister Eckhart. Let us imagine your sin was as grave as all the sins of history added together. God can take you right now and can forgive all of that and accept it and treat it as if it's just gone. It's just the past. God is God of the present. For all intents and purposes, from God's point of view, it's a fiction. God takes you as you are now. And now, with that, think about how you might take your next steps into the day. Are you going to focus back on criticizing yourself? Or are you going to turn this maybe into thanksgiving? That would be a good alternative approach, just to pause and to thank the divine love, that it knows you, that it loves you, and that it accepts you fully as you are now, and that you can walk into the future, each new step. I was thinking yesterday about the spiritual journey. It's very much like maybe a child walking. You know, we walk by falling. Walking is controlled falling. Running even more so. There's one leg, as we reach forward with the next leg, we're effectively falling. We break and resist our fall, and then the next leg comes over. It's like, you know, success is a continued practice of falling, failing, learning, stopping, and moving on to the next step. I'd love some feedback from you, just because these are things I'm hoping to continue doing. I will bring you more reflections as I go through Eckhart's work, reflecting on these myself and sharing them with you. And I just want to also add, of course, that if you need actual mental health support, this is not a replacement for mental health support. Do go and see your doctor or your GP if you're in the UK, your medical doctor in the US or wherever else you are. You may need more in-depth psychological support with a therapist or so forth. So this is not meant as a replacement for that, but just for ordinary people who might benefit from some of these insights. Well, thank you for listening, and have a great day.